a heartbreaking bravery. Mother and baby's unforgettable reunion. Broken heart, true story. Have you ever felt the kind of fear that makes your heart race and your stomach twist? Imagine being separated from the ones you love the most, and the only thing you can do is hope, pray, and wait. This is the story of a mother and her baby, a story that will touch your heart, make you hold your loved ones a little tighter, and remind you of the incredible power of love. It all started one cold, rainy night. In a small town tucked away from the big cities, a young mother named Sarah was holding her baby, Emma, close to her chest. The world outside seemed far away, and for a moment, everything felt safe. But little did Sarah know, life was about to throw a cruel twist their way. One minute, she was walking home with Emma, the world around them calm and quiet. The next moment, chaos struck. A car speeding down the street lost control, heading straight for Sarah and her baby. In a split second, Sarah made a choice that would change everything. With all her strength, she threw her baby out of harm's way. But Sarah wasn't so lucky. The car struck her, sending her flying across the street, leaving her badly hurt. In the blink of an eye, Emma was left alone, lying on the cold ground, crying for her mother. Hours passed. The rain soaked the earth. Emma's cries grew weaker as she was picked up by strangers, kind-hearted people who saw the disaster unfold and rushed to her aid. But Sarah, she was taken to the hospital, unconscious, unable to even know if her baby was okay. In the hospital, doctors did their best to save Sarah, but no one could predict what was happening outside. Emma had been taken to a children's shelter with no clue where her mother was or if she would ever see her again. Days turned into weeks. Emma's cries for her mother never stopped. She clung to the memory of Sarah's voice, of her warm hugs, and the love she had felt. But the world had changed, and Sarah was lost to her. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Sarah woke up to find herself alone, her body broken and bruised. She couldn't remember exactly what had happened, but the pain in her heart was undeniable. She needed to find Emma. She had to. But there was one problem. No one knew where Emma was. No one could tell Sarah what had happened to her baby. She had no one to turn to. But Sarah wasn't someone to give up. The love for her child burned brighter than any pain. She knew she had to fight. Every doctor and nurse she spoke to, every police officer she reached out to, no one could give her answers. It was then that Sarah made a decision. She would find her baby, no matter the cost. She could barely walk, but she dragged herself out of that hospital bed and onto the streets. Weeks of searching followed, each day more hopeless than the last. But just when Sarah had begun to lose faith, a miracle happened. One quiet evening, as Sarah was walking through the town square, she heard something. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper in the wind. Then it hit her, the sound of a familiar voice. "Mommy, Mommy." Tears flooded her eyes as she turned toward the voice. There, standing in the middle of the square, was Emma. But she wasn't alone. The world seemed to stop in that moment. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Her baby was standing there, right in front of her, calling for her. The sound of Emma's voice filled the air, wrapping around Sarah like a warm blanket, but she couldn't believe her eyes. Emma was still alive. She hadn't forgotten her. And in that moment, everything felt possible again. But something was different. Emma was not the little girl Sarah had left behind. She was holding something in her tiny hands, a piece of paper, torn at the edges, with a name scribbled on it. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. Sarah's legs felt like jelly as she ran towards her baby, reaching out to her with trembling hands. But before she could pull Emma into her arms, a stranger appeared. A man, tall and worn, with a sad look in his eyes. "I'm sorry," the man said, his voice shaky. "She's been through a lot. We found her, and I've been taking care of her." Sarah could barely hear him over the pounding of her own heart. She had so many questions, so much fear. Where had Emma been all this time? Who was this man? But the most important thing was that Emma was safe. And now she could finally hold her again. With tears streaming down her face, Sarah scooped Emma into her arms, her baby, her little girl. She never thought this moment would come, but here it was. "I thought I lost you forever," Sarah whispered, hugging Emma tightly. "I'll never let you go again." Emma clung to her mother's chest, nodding, but the fear in her eyes wasn't completely gone. She didn't speak for a long time, just clutched Sarah's shirt and looked at the man who had helped her. The man who, it turned out, was a homeless veteran, someone who had seen Emma wandering the streets alone, scared and hungry. He had taken her in and cared for her, bringing her a little comfort in a world that had turned upside down. But now, the reunion wasn't over yet. There was something Sarah still didn't understand. Why Emma had been alone. How she had gotten separated from her in the first place, and who was responsible for everything that had happened. The man explained that he had found Emma near an old, abandoned church, scared and crying. But there was no sign of the car that had hit Sarah. No one knew what had happened to it, or the driver. It was like they had vanished into thin air. For days, Sarah and Emma stayed at the man's humble shelter, trying to piece together what had happened. Sarah had to rebuild her strength, physically and emotionally. But the fear that had gripped Emma was still there, and Sarah knew that, no matter how much love and comfort she gave, there was something they would both need to face. The real story of what happened that night was still waiting to unfold. The days that followed were filled with questions and quiet moments of reflection. Sarah and Emma had found refuge with the kind man, whom they now learned was named Thomas. He lived in a small, run-down cabin near the edge of the town. Despite his humble surroundings, Thomas treated Emma like his own daughter, providing her with food and comfort during the hardest days. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The pieces of the puzzle didn't quite fit together. She had heard no news about the car that had struck her. No police reports, no sightings, nothing. It was as if it had all disappeared, like the night Sarah was hit never happened. One evening, as the rain gently tapped against the cabin windows, Sarah sat with Thomas, trying to make sense of everything. Emma, now safe in her mother's arms, was drawing quietly in the corner, but her eyes were constantly searching the room, as if waiting for something. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, looking out the window into the darkening sky. "I should have heard something. There should be some kind of lead, a clue. The car, it vanished. The driver disappeared. Where are they?" Thomas, who had been quiet up until now, leaned forward in his chair, his face etched with the years of hardship he'd seen. "Maybe the person who did this doesn't want to be found," he said quietly, his voice heavy with unspoken truths. "Some people would do anything to avoid the law, but I'm sure whoever it was is out there, and I'm sure they know what they did." His words hung in the air. Sarah's heart tightened. It was one thing to have her baby back, but the truth was still out there, haunting her. She needed answers. The next morning, as the sun rose over the town, Sarah took Emma's hand and told her they needed to find out what happened that night. She couldn't keep living in the shadows of that uncertainty. Emma, still quiet and cautious, nodded. She trusted her mother completely. They left Thomas's cabin and made their way to the local police station. Sarah, though weak from her injuries, walked with determination. She had to know who was responsible for the pain, the fear, the separation. As they entered the police station, the officer at the desk recognized her immediately. "Sarah, you're back," Officer Lopez said gently. "We've been looking for you. There's been no sign of the driver who hit you, but we're still investigating. Are you all right?" Sarah nodded, her mind swirling. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady but firm. "But my daughter, she needs to know what happened. I need to know what happened." The officer hesitated before speaking, his eyes scanning her face as if he wanted to say more, but didn't know how. "We have reason to believe the person who hit you may have been involved in other crimes, Sarah. But it's all just theories right now. We can't confirm anything until we get more evidence." At that moment, Sarah felt a mix of relief and frustration. It was as if the truth was close, but still out of reach. She couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of conspiracy, or if fate had simply thrown a shadow over their lives. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation continued, but no new leads emerged. Thomas, though helpful, seemed to grow more distant as Sarah became consumed by the need for answers. Emma, who had once clung to her mother with such warmth, now seemed to withdraw, her silence growing heavier by the day. One evening, Sarah sat alone by the fire, her thoughts scattered. She was still trying to piece together the mystery of the accident. She couldn't let go. But just as she stood up to pace the room, she noticed something strange. Emma's drawing book was open, the pages filled with pictures. Sarah picked it up, flipping through the pages. She gasped as she saw the drawings, simple but powerful. There, in the center of one page, was a picture of a car, sketched with dark strokes. And beside it, a tall, shadowy figure standing next to it, staring blankly. "Emma," Sarah whispered, holding up the drawing. "What is this?" Emma's eyes flickered toward her mother, and for the first time in weeks, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "The man, he was watching." Sarah's heart stopped. The room felt suddenly heavy as Sarah stared at Emma's drawing. Her little girl had drawn the car, the shadowy figure, and something else, a deep, haunting feeling that made Sarah's stomach twist. Emma's voice, though soft and faint, carried a weight that Sarah couldn't ignore. "The man, he was watching." "Emma, what do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly as she crouched down to Emma's level, holding the drawing in her hands. "Who was watching?" Emma bit her lip, her eyes wide, and filled with a mix of fear and confusion. "I don't know. I remember him when it happened. He was standing, looking at us." Emma clutched her mother's sleeve. "I don't want to remember anymore." Sarah's heart raced. Could Emma have seen the driver of the car, the one who had hit her, leaving them both broken and lost? The figure in her drawing was so vivid, so real, like a shadow that had lingered in Emma's mind. "Emma, it's okay," Sarah whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You don't have to remember it now. You're safe. You're with me." But even as Sarah comforted her daughter, her own heart pounded with growing anxiety. If Emma had seen the person who caused the accident, it meant there was something more, a person, a face, a presence lurking in the background, waiting to be uncovered. The next day, Sarah decided it was time to confront the truth. The police had their theories, but they needed more than just suspicions. Emma's memory, no matter how fragmented, could hold the key. It was time to take matters into her own hands. She met with Officer Lopez, sharing Emma's drawing and the unsettling words her daughter had spoken the night before. The officer listened carefully, nodding as Sarah explained the situation. "I know it's not much to go on," Sarah said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But if Emma really saw something, maybe it's the clue we need." Officer Lopez's face grew serious as he examined the drawing. He frowned and tapped a pen against his desk. "We'll run this through our sketches and try to match it with anyone in the area at the time of the accident. It's a long shot, but it's worth a try." Sarah felt a small flicker of hope. This could be the break she needed to find out what happened. But deep down, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something more to this story, something deeper and more sinister that had yet to reveal itself. Over the next few days, the police followed up on Emma's drawing, but there was no immediate breakthrough. Meanwhile, Sarah and Emma spent more time with Thomas, finding comfort in the quiet moments of normalcy. Emma was slowly returning to herself, but Sarah knew her daughter still carried the weight of what had happened. One afternoon, as Sarah sat by the window, watching the trees sway in the wind, Thomas came to sit beside her. His presence was always steady, a calm amidst the storm. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," Thomas began, his voice low. "There's something you should know about that night. I've been holding it back because I didn't want to scare you." Sarah turned to him, her heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" Thomas hesitated for a moment, then sighed deeply. "I heard something the night of the accident. I didn't see it, but I heard it. The crash, followed by footsteps, heavy ones. Someone was running away from the scene. I didn't know if it was important at the time, but now I think it might be." Sarah's breath caught in her chest. The idea of someone running away, disappearing into the night, made her blood run cold. Was this person involved in the accident? Was he the one Emma had seen? "Did you hear where they went?" Sarah asked, leaning in, her voice trembling with urgency. Thomas shook his head. "No, I didn't. It was too dark, and I couldn't risk drawing attention to myself. But I can't help thinking that whoever was involved in that accident didn't want to be found." Sarah's mind raced as she processed the new information. She felt like she was getting closer to the truth, but the pieces still didn't fit. Why had this person run away? What were they hiding? And most importantly, was Emma's drawing the key to unraveling it all? The days that followed were filled with tension and questions. Sarah's mind was consumed with the discovery that someone had been running away from the scene that night. She couldn't stop thinking about the footsteps Thomas had heard and the shadowy figure Emma had drawn. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but the more she thought about it, the clearer it became that she was getting closer to uncovering something dangerous. That evening, after a long day of searching for any leads, Sarah sat down with Emma, who had been unusually quiet. The once bubbly, fearless little girl was now often lost in thought, her eyes distant. Sarah knew the accident had shaken Emma to her core, but she couldn't help but wonder if there was more that her daughter hadn't said yet. "Emma, baby," Sarah said gently, brushing Emma's hair back from her face. "I need you to tell me everything you remember. Anything, no matter how small, could help us." Emma looked up at her mother, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. "I'm scared, Mommy," she whispered. "I don't want to remember anymore. The man, he was so mean." Sarah's heart ached as she pulled Emma into her arms. "I know, sweetheart, I know. But sometimes the only way to be free from the fear is to face it. We'll get through this together, okay?" Emma nodded, though her grip on her mother tightened. She took a deep breath and began to speak in a quiet voice, the words coming slowly, as if they had been trapped inside her for too long. "I remember the car came really fast," Emma said, her voice trembling. "And then the man got out of the car. He was tall and he had dark clothes on. He looked mad. He looked like he was in a hurry. And then he just left. He didn't even look back at me or Mommy. Sarah held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Did he say anything, Emma? Anything at all? Emma shook her head. No, Mommy. He didn't talk to me. He just ran. And then I couldn't see you. I couldn't find you. I called for you, but you didn't answer. The tears began to fall from Sarah's eyes. She wanted to shield Emma from the horrors of that night, but she also knew that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only way forward. Emma had seen the man who had caused the crash. She had seen him run, disappearing into the night, leaving them both broken. Determined to find answers, Sarah returned to the police station the next morning. Officer Lopez greeted her with a concerned look, and she quickly showed him the new information Emma had shared. Officer, I think Emma saw the man who caused the accident, Sarah said, her voice urgent. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, and he ran away right after the crash. I need your help to find him. Lopez studied the drawings again, his brow furrowed. This changes things, he murmured. We'll take this seriously. We'll try to match the description with any recent criminal activity. I'll have the team start a search for anyone who fits this profile. But Sarah, we may be dealing with someone who doesn't want to be found. Sarah nodded, a mix of hope and fear swirling in her chest. This wasn't just about the accident anymore. The man wasn't just an ordinary driver. He was someone with a motive, someone who had something to hide. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer to uncovering something bigger than just a hit and run. Days passed with no major updates. The police were still gathering leads, but nothing concrete came through. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to care for Emma, trying her best to provide a sense of normalcy in their new life. But Emma's silence, her avoidance of certain places and people, weighed heavily on Sarah. She couldn't protect her from everything, and there were still so many unanswered questions. Then one afternoon, a phone call came that would change everything. It was Officer Lopez. His voice was low, almost hesitant. Sarah, I need you to come to the station. We found something. Sarah's stomach flipped as she rushed to the police station, Emma in tow. When they arrived, Lopez led them into an interrogation room where he showed them a set of surveillance footage. The images were grainy, but there was no mistaking it. The man Emma had described tall, with dark clothes, was clearly visible in the video, walking away from the scene of the crash. Who is he? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Lopez hesitated, then answered, We're still working on that, but we've seen him before. He's been linked to a series of burglaries in the area. And there's something else, Sarah. We've learned that he might be connected to a bigger operation. This isn't just a random accident. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she absorbed Officer Lopez's words. A bigger operation. She had been so focused on finding out what happened the night of the accident that she hadn't imagined this would be part of the story. There was more at play here, something darker than a simple hit and run. Bigger operation. What do you mean? Sarah's voice trembled, the uncertainty in her words matching the growing fear in her heart. Lopez leaned in, his face serious. We believe the man you've described has ties to a criminal network. He's been involved in several thefts and robberies in the past year. The police have been tracking him for months, but he's always managed to slip through the cracks. It seems like this accident wasn't just an accident. It might have been an intentional act to cover up something bigger. We think he was in a rush to get away from the scene of something else. Sarah felt her world tilt. Was her accident connected to these crimes? Was she somehow caught in the middle of something much more dangerous than she had realized? Are you saying he wasn't just after me? Sarah asked, her mind racing. Lopez hesitated. It's hard to say for sure, but we think his real motive was something else entirely. We're investigating the possibility that he was involved in illegal activities and that the crash was an accident while he was trying to flee. But we need more evidence to know for certain. The room fell silent as Sarah processed the new information. Emma, who had been clinging to Sarah's side, tugged at her sleeve. Sarah looked down to find Emma staring at her with wide eyes, as if she had something more to say. "Mommy," Emma said softly, I think the man, he knows us." Sarah's heart froze. What did Emma mean? How could she possibly know that? "What do you mean, baby?" Sarah asked gently, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. Emma looked up at her, her small face serious. I remember seeing his face before. In the park, when we were playing. He was watching us from the bench, Mommy. He was always watching." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Could Emma be right? Could the man who hit her have been watching them before the accident even happened? The idea sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't just a random person. It was someone who had been lurking in their lives without them even knowing. The police took Emma's revelation seriously. Lopez immediately ordered a more thorough investigation into the man's past, digging into every possible link he had to Sarah's family and the town. It became clear that this wasn't just a matter of finding a suspect. It was about uncovering a network of crime that had been hiding in plain sight. As Sarah sat in the station, waiting for updates, she couldn't help but think of Emma's words. He was always watching. Her mind wandered back to those moments before the crash. She had always felt something wasn't quite right, but she had never known it was someone in the shadows, someone connected to a web of criminal activity. What was his true motive? What had he been trying to cover up? And most terrifying of all, was he still out there? The next day, Sarah and Emma stayed with Thomas, far from the chaos of the investigation. Emma was still uneasy, unable to shake the memory of the man's face. She spent most of the day drawing quietly, but Sarah could see that her daughter wasn't the same little girl anymore. She had seen too much, remembered too much. As the evening settled, Sarah heard a knock on the door. When she opened it, Officer Lopez stood there, his face grim. "We've got something," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We found the man. He's in custody. But there's more. We need to talk to you. There's a connection to a much larger case, Sarah. A case that could bring down a whole operation. You're in the middle of something much bigger than we originally thought." Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her. The man they had been chasing was finally in custody. But what had they uncovered? What was waiting to be exposed? Sarah's heart raced as she heard Officer Lopez's words. A larger case. She had been so focused on finding answers about the accident, on reuniting with Emma, and uncovering the identity of the man who had caused so much pain, that she hadn't imagined this would turn into something far more complicated. "We need to talk to you about what we found," Lopez continued, his voice low but urgent. "We believe this man is connected to a criminal syndicate that's been operating in the area for months. He's not just some random guy who made a mistake. This was deliberate. And your family were caught right in the middle of it." Sarah's mind raced as she absorbed his words. A criminal syndicate. How had this all become so complicated? She had been just a mother, trying to protect her daughter. Yet now she was involved in a much larger investigation that could change everything. "Can you tell me more?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, fear creeping in as she imagined the implications of what Lopez was saying. "What are they involved in?" Lopez hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the room as if weighing the weight of the words he was about to say. "These people are linked to a number of illegal activities: drug trafficking, human smuggling, and theft," Lopez explained, his voice steady but filled with gravity. "We think the man who hit you was part of this ring. His car, the one that crashed into you, was stolen as part of a larger operation. He was likely trying to escape the scene, and your accident was a way for him to cover up his tracks." Sarah could hardly breathe as she processed the information. Her accident, her suffering, was tied to something so much larger. And to think that Emma had been right there, witnessing it all, made the whole situation feel even more terrifying. "So all of this happened because of them?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking as she tried to make sense of it. "Because they were running from the law." Lopez nodded grimly. "Exactly. And there's more we've uncovered. The man's real name isn't what he gave us. It's a false identity, and we've found several other aliases he's used in the past. We think he was in town to deliver something or make a deal. Your accident was just a byproduct of a much larger plan." Sarah's thoughts were spinning. She had barely been able to wrap her head around the idea of a random accident, and now she learned it was all part of something criminal. Her family, unknowingly, had become entangled in a dangerous web of crime, and the truth was still far from clear. "What happens now?" she asked, feeling the weight of the situation settle in her chest. "We've got the man in custody," Lopez replied. "But the investigation is far from over. We're going to need your help, Sarah. You've seen him. Emma's description of the man is one of the key pieces that helped us track him down. We'll need you to identify him in a lineup. Sarah swallowed hard. The thought of facing the man who had caused her so much pain, the one who had made her daughter live through a nightmare, filled her with dread. But she knew it was the only way forward. She had to face him. I'll do whatever it takes, Sarah said, her voice firm despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. I need to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. That afternoon, Sarah and Emma were taken to the police station to participate in a lineup. The room was sterile, with a single table and several officers present. Emma clung to her mother's side, but Sarah could see her little one's eyes were wide with fear. The trauma of that night still haunted her, and now this new fear was just adding to the weight on her shoulders. As the lineup began, Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She knew this was necessary, but she couldn't help but feel like she was stepping into a dark, unknown place. The man who had crashed into her, the man who had watched them, stood among the others, his face obscured by a glass wall. Sarah could barely look at him. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emma whispered, her tiny voice quivering. "I know, sweetheart. It's okay," Sarah whispered back, squeezing her daughter's hand. "We're doing the right thing." One by one, the officers asked Sarah to point out the man. She wasn't sure if she could do it. The memory of that moment of the crash, of the man running away, was still a blur in her mind. But then, as her eyes scanned the faces, she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. There in the lineup was the man. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. She knew it was him. The same dark eyes, the same piercing stare. The man who had caused the crash, who had shattered their world. "That's him," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "That's the man." Lopez nodded, signaling the officers to take the next steps in the process. But even as the man was led away, Sarah couldn't shake the sense of dread that still clung to her. The truth was now in motion, but what would happen next? The days that followed the lineup were tense and filled with uncertainty. With the man in custody, Sarah could finally breathe a little easier, but the truth of what had happened and what was yet to come still weighed heavily on her heart. She had faced the man who had caused so much pain, and though justice was beginning to unfold, the journey was far from over. As the investigation deepened, Officer Lopez and his team uncovered more about the criminal syndicate that the man was a part of. They had been involved in trafficking stolen cars, illegal deals, and other dangerous activities. Sarah, Emma, and countless others had unknowingly become part of this vicious cycle, simply by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But through it all, there was one undeniable truth. Sarah and Emma's bravery had been the key to breaking the chain. Emma's memory, her drawings, and her willingness to speak out had helped the police find the man who had caused the accident. Sarah's strength in facing the man in the lineup had brought them one step closer to stopping the criminal network from hurting anyone else. One quiet evening, after the chaos had subsided and the trial for the man was underway, Sarah sat down with Emma in their small living room. The air was calm, the kind of peace they had not known in so long. Emma, who had been through so much, was finally beginning to heal. Sarah could see the light slowly returning to her daughter's eyes, the sparkle that had once been dulled by fear. "Mommy," Emma said, her voice soft but full of warmth, "I'm not scared anymore. I know we're safe now." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You were so brave, baby. You saved us." "I didn't save us alone, Mommy." "You saved us too," Emma replied, her small hand resting gently on Sarah's. The two of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened settling into a quiet understanding. They had faced darkness, but they had come through it stronger, united by the bond of love and resilience. And so, the story of Sarah and Emma's unforgettable reunion came to an end. But the lessons it taught would live on. Through their strength, courage, and love for one another, they had overcome unimaginable challenges. They had faced fear, danger, and loss, and yet they never gave up on each other. The moral of the story is simple yet profound. In the darkest moments of life, the power of love, courage, and perseverance can light the way. Never underestimate the strength of a mother's love or the bravery that lies within even the smallest hearts. In times of fear and hardship, holding on to hope and never giving up can lead to the most powerful of reunions. No matter how hard life may get, always remember, love and bravery are the greatest forces we have.